famous storyteller if the storyteller is Russian, even if the storyteller doesn't have a permanent house in St. Petersburg, or Moscow, or Novgorod, or Tobolska, but has a parent or grandparent, or great-great-great-great-great-grandparent who were once upon a time Russians. I live in different places throughout the world, sometimes in Nevada, a state in America where it doesn't snow like it does in Siberia. Sometimes I stay in Istanbul, Turkey, where there are many more bridges than there are in Ekaterinburg. And once in a while, I live in a very famous town named Bethlehem, which doesn't have a very large museum like the ones in Moscow, but is very important in the Russian story I'm about to hear. But wherever I go, well, I should say wherever I am a Russian storyteller, because I carry Russian stories with me, in my suitcase, in my brain, and on my tongue. The story I'm going to entertain you with? My mother told it to me when I was a little boy. She told me the story every year between New Year celebrations and Christmas festivities. Well, because I have a very colorful imagination, I changed a few parts of the story because, well, that's what my mother did. After her mother told it to her every year, and her mother told it to her every year, and her mother told it to her, and I can save time by simply saying it's based on a Russian Christmas story first told many, many, many years ago, even though no Russian story has any idea who was the first person to tell it. So I will begin by saying the first 6 words many stories begin with. Once upon a time, there was. Alexandra was only 9 years old in December back in 1929, which was almost 100 years ago, when her school teacher surprisingly announced to the students that people in Russia were not going to be allowed to celebrate Christmas. The shocked and confused girl who so enjoyed reading books on Russian history mumbled to her best friend Olga sitting at the desk next to her, "Talk about the Russian history time of trouble. This is even worse." When the teacher dismissed the class at the end of the day, Alexandra, so bewildered and feeling heartbroken, walked through the snowstorm alone. Even though she and Olga lived in different directions, sometimes they walked with each other for a few minutes. But that day, Alexandra wanted to be alone. She couldn't stop thinking, no Ded Moroz, Grandfather Frost with his big staff, and no Snegrushka, his granddaughter, to bring me presents. As her boots stomped through the deeper part of the snow-covered street, she could smell the aroma of the freshly baked bread floating through the air from the kitchens in the surrounding houses. My mother and grandmother and aunts won't be cooking sochevo and kutia for Christmas Eve. The porridge made with honey and poppy seeds and berries and chopped walnuts is so delicious. This year, both of my grandmothers promised me they would put fruit jellies in the porridge. She didn't know why, but when she arrived at her house, she was afraid to open the door and enter. Another feeling to be confused about. Watching her father working on the side of the barn, he was chopping wood, and the loud banging of his axe on the thick tree branches, and seeing a crying baby lamb struggling to walk in the snow, made her feel strangely nervous. Then she realized what she was going to miss most. Yes, she whispered aloud to herself, the honey bread cookies, the Pryanki my mother bakes for Christmas Eve. Though Alexander's older brother Ivan preferred that the cookies be made in the shape of a goat, Alexandra always asked her mom to make the Pryanki in the shape of a lamb. The sad 9-year-old girl wasn't the only quiet person in the house that evening. Even at the dinner table, when everyone usually and loudly chomped on their food and slurped their drinks and talked so fast and loud, often adding lots of exuberant laughing but sometimes arguing, the family members barely shared words with one another. When she was helping her mom wash the pots and pans, Alexandra decided it was time to finally ask an adult, "Why can't we celebrate Christmas this year?" But her mom merely shrugged her shoulders and shook her head, refusing to offer an explanation. Alexandra knew her mom was upset because when she tossed the forks, spoons, and knives into the sink, she forgot there was a glass in the water, and it broke. Later that night, she knocked on her brother's bedroom door. When he opened it, she stood at the entrance on the hard floor in her stocking feet, and without waiting another second, she blurted out, "Do you know why we can't celebrate Christmas this year?" He wrinkled his fat nose, squinted his eyes, puckered his lips, and angrily replied, "How would I know? Nobody tells me anything except to go to school, feed the sheep, don't stomp snow all over the floor, and make sure the wolves don't eat you when you're collecting eggs from the chickens." Then he slammed the door. Lying in bed under the colorful, heavy quilts woven from sheep's wool, both of her grandmothers were highly respected by townsfolk for their skills as weavers. She stared into the darkness. The combined feelings of sadness and confusion, and now a sneaking eruption of a little anger, tormented her brain and soul. She stared at the ceiling. She could hear her mother's footsteps walking back and forth on her parents' bedroom floor above her room. She knew her father was sleeping because, as always, she could hear his loud snoring, always sounding like a grizzly bear huffing and puffing while searching for food in a windy snowstorm. Though her eyes were tired, her brain was not. The continuous parade of questions and no answers marched side to side one moment, up and down the next, and then circling all around inside her mind. Finally, she wore herself out thinking too much. Every one of her school teachers had always told her that she thinks too much, but she never understood what they meant. How can someone think too much? That's what the brain is for. It's our thinking organ. With no clock in the bedroom, she didn't know how long she had been sleeping when her eyes popped open, and with a spontaneous jerk, she sat up. Stunned at waking suddenly, she waited for a few seconds, at least it felt like only a few seconds, before she plopped her upper body back onto the warm bed and her head onto the fluffy wrinkled pillow. Alexandra turned her head and looked at the window. The snow was falling on the trees again, yet every so often, if she didn't close her eyes long enough, she could see in the patches of the dark sky twinkling stars. How can stars sparkle when it's snowing, she wondered. When she rolled over onto her side, turning her face more towards the window, she mumbled aloud, "I wonder if it snows on stars." Then she spontaneously sat up once again. "Oh my gosh," she thought, biting her lower lip so she couldn't shout and wake everyone in the house. She knew what she was really, really, really going to miss the most about not celebrating Christmas. She threw the quilts off of her little body. She quickly tiptoed across the room. Oh, the floor was so cold, even though her feet were covered with 2 pairs of thick woolen stockings. She scurried to her little table with a pile of school books, her pencils, and notebooks. Carefully grabbing a pencil and notebook that only had 4 or 5 empty pages left to write in, she hurried back to bed, tucking herself underneath the blankets. She put the pillow up on the dashboard and rested her head on it. She began to scribble as fast as thoughts popped into her head. She couldn't see any words she was writing. She didn't want to get out of bed again, touch the cold wooden floor with her stocking feet, and fumble for a match. She couldn't check her spelling. She didn't even know if she was writing in a straight line. She didn't care. What was most important was that she captured every word and sentence that she felt sprung up from her heart or from the inside of her soul. Of course, she had never seen her heart, but she knew she had one because, well, she could feel it beat. However, she often asked herself, her mom, grandmothers, aunties about something that really bothered her. How do I know if I really have a soul? As with so many of her questions, no one gave her an answer. When she finished writing, hoping that she would be able to read her scribbling, she closed the notebook and put it, with the pencil, on her small nightstand where she kept a photo of her 2 grandfathers who, she knew, were in heaven. Of course, one of her most frequent questions no one answered was, just where is heaven? It didn't take long for her to fall asleep. The last thought she had was, I know what I wrote will make everyone in the village happy on Christmas Eve, even though we will have to pretend we're not celebrating. Days and nights went by. Sometimes Alexandra felt the hours passed too slowly and other times way too fast. Life in the Russian village consisted of daily routines. Wake up, light the fireplace, to the warm house, cook and eat breakfast, do morning chores, go to school, eat lunch with Olga, walk home halfway with Olga, do afternoon chores, listen to Grandma's lectures, don't do that, don't do this, finish school homework assignments, help her mom cook, eat dinner, wash pots and pans, read books, listen to the radio, and one day a week, go to church, and one day a week, go sled riding and ice skating in the winter. Starting that particular night, Alexandra kept another routine to constantly be excited about what she was going to do with what she wrote in her notebook. Finally, what felt like an ordinary day, instead of joyfully spending all day in the kitchen with her mom, grandmas, and aunties, baking and cooking for the traditional Christmas Eve dinner, and helping her father and brother Ivan cut down the tree for decorating, she went to school. "Who goes to school on Christmas Eve day?" she moaned to Olga. Her best friend, who was the only person who knew Alexandra's secret plan, giggled. "It really is the Russian time of trouble again. But tonight, you will give happiness to lots of people in the village. Well, only if you can think of an idea how you can get everyone to come together in your parents' field." The two girls stomped through the snow until Alexandra stopped and yelled, "I've got the solution!" Olga immediately threw her gloved hands over her hat, covered her ears. "Good gosh, Alexandra, you shouted so loud you probably woke up the sleeping bears in the forest. I hope they aren't too hungry and smell us. I think we smell like potatoes and cabbage from the lunch we ate today." Alexandra was so excited about her solution, she didn't bother asking Olga if she was serious or joking. "Okay, as you know, everyone in the village on Christmas Eve stays home until the first stars appear in the sky. Then, everyone in the house forms a circle around the Christmas tree and calls for Grandfather Frost and his granddaughter Skoroka to appear and bring them presents." Olga shrugged and replied, "But we can't do this now." Alexandra excitedly said, "Of course, you're right, but I know what we can do. I need your help. Let's go back to school. We need 416 sheets of paper since there are 416 houses in our village. You and I will write a short announcement inviting everyone in the village to meet in my father's field outside the barn. When the first stars appear in the sky and everyone can see them twinkle, we will put on the announcement that we are having a memorial service to honor all of the grandfathers and grandmothers who are in heaven." Olga looked confused, but that's not what your secret plan really is. What about what you wrote in your notebook? Alexandra nodded. "In a way it is. Okay, just a small way, but if you think about it, which I have, of course, because that's what I do best, think. All the grandfathers and grandmothers and great-great-great-grandmothers and great-great-great-grandmothers and fathers were once upon a time Russian storytellers because, well, everyone has a story to tell, don't they? Don't we? So tonight we will tell a story everyone knows. Only I changed it around a little bit because, well, that is what a storyteller should always do. Use the part of the brain that holds the invisible imagination." The two girls quickly turned around and urgently ran back to the school. When Alexandra pleaded with her teacher, who was feeling sad about having no Christmas tree to decorate in her house, for 416 papers, the elderly woman who had celebrated 67 Christmases asked why. Listening to her student's explanation, the teacher smiled, laughed, and applauded before immediately pulling a stack of paper from the drawer in her wooden desk. "Let me help you write the announcement. With the three of us, we'll get it done very fast." Exactly 34 minutes later, the three of them, bundled in heavy coats, gloves, scarves, hats, and boots, rushed through the snow-covered village fields and streets. At each house, a piece of paper was left at the door. They were so anxious to make sure they finished distributing the announcements as fast as possible, they didn't bother to fold the papers, only hoping the wind didn't blow them away. But a strong gust of wind blew against one empty house. Alexandra didn't know why she left a paper in the door. She was aware that nobody had lived in it for many years. In fact, It had been empty for so long that nobody in the village, not even the oldest people, could remember who lived in it once upon a time. Alexandra didn't notice that particular piece of paper flying through the sky. During dinner, Alexandra's family members ate in silence. Each had repeatedly asked Alexandra what she was planning, but she refused to disclose her secret. Her mother and 2 grandmothers were so nervous that their trembling fingers could barely lift a soup spoon to their lips. When darkness filled the sky, people poked their heads out the frosty windows, searching for the appearance of the first twinkling star. Though everyone was terribly sad Christmas Eve had begun without the traditional food and customs, curiosity about Alexander's surprising and mysterious planned event helped them to pretend they weren't upset. Then, the banging of 416 doors and noisy pairs of boots stomping through deep snow first twinkling star. Above their heads was a sparkling star. Within minutes, the field surrounding Alexander's parents' house was filled with shivering villagers, and the sky was filled with millions of sparkling stars. Alexandra stood on 3 large tree stumps piled atop one another. She wanted to make sure everyone could see her as she read her story. Earlier, she had asked her father and brother to prepare the stumps as if they were her miniature stage. She wasn't nervous, but when she looked at her mom's worried face, Alexandra felt as if a swarm of bumblebees were buzzing around inside her stomach. She quickly turned her eyes towards Olga, whose big smile made Alexandra feel brave again. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to my parents' field. Look around and see how beautiful our village is. Our fields and trees, the roofs of our homes and barns are covered with pure white snow. Well, everything is white except where the sheep, cows, mules, horses, dogs, moose, and wolves do their business, if you know what I mean. Everyone laughed, which made Alexandra's mother and 2 grandmothers feel a little relaxed. I want to read a story I wrote. I know all of us know the story. It's a Christmas story. Everyone gasped in shock. Alexandra's 2 grandmas gasped louder than anyone. Alexandra knew that every adult, teen, and child were thinking the same thing. We have to pretend it's not Christmas Eve. She also realized in a split second that her mother and grandmothers were thinking, Alexandra is going to get us all in trouble. But the 9-year-old brave storyteller continued speaking. I used my imagination. I wrote my own version of the story. So I wrote it not to celebrate a Christmas tradition, but to honor the art of Russian storytelling. When we were told we couldn't celebrate Christmas Eve, we weren't told we had to stop telling stories. Everyone looked at one another and nodded. Alexandra could hear people whispering and mumbling. That's true. She's right. We aren't here in the field because it's Christmas Eve. We're here to hear her story. Alexandra cleared her throat, looked at her father, whose face showed how proud he was of his daughter, and spoke. I want to dedicate this story to every grandfather and grandmother who ever lived in our village, even if they lived here 1,000 years ago, because they knew this story and they told it during the... Everyone held their breath. They were afraid she would finish her sentence by saying, they told it during the Christmas season. But Alexandra, being a clever thinker, said, they told it whenever they felt like telling it, on any given day, on any given month, in any given year or decade or century. Stories can be told at any time, no matter the theme or plot or characters. Everyone applauded. Alexandra's father clapped the loudest. Once upon a time, in our village, in that empty house, everyone turned to look at the mysterious house. There lived a very old woman. She was so old that nobody could possibly count the number of wrinkles covering her face and hands. She had no family. She lived alone. But there was a rumor, a legend, a story, that people whispered about whenever she walked through the village to the church. The secret was, once upon a time when the old lady was young, she had a baby boy in the house. But one day he disappeared. It was suspected he had wandered off when he was learning to walk, and he wandered into the forest and a bear, or maybe a wolf, had... Alexandra paused. She saw that everyone's eyes and mouths were opening wide. They were all concerned. They were about to hear a very sad story. Immediately, Alexandra continued. But nobody knew if that was true or not, because nobody had ever seen her walking through the village with a baby boy or a little boy. And the old woman was very happy and polite. She never said anything bad about anyone in the village, and she was always giving people food from her garden. And on each New Year's Eve day, she walked from house to house giving all the village children jelly fruit donuts she baked. Well, one night, when the sky was filled with twinkling stars, 3 men wearing crowns on their heads surprised the villagers. Each of the men, dressed in long, colorful robes sticking out from their large, colorful coats, was riding an animal nobody in the village had ever seen before except in books. Camels! Everyone instantly recognized the 3 strangers were royal kings. The fattest king shouted loudly, "We are 3 kings from the Orient. We are on our way to a town called Bethlehem. We are following the largest and brightest star in the sky." Alexandra paused while everyone lifted their faces and looked up at the stars to see if they could see the largest and brightest one. She continued, "The 3 kings knocked on the door of each house. They were searching for beds to sleep in for one night. But no house had 3 empty beds, except the house belonging to the wrinkled old woman who lived in it all alone. She welcomed the 3 kings into her house. She fed them sochvo kutia, putting extra spoonfuls of honey, poppy seeds, berries, chopped walnuts, and adding fruit jellies to her porridge. She prepared for them zar, a sweet drink of dried fruit boiled in water and mixed with dried fruits. She made them delicious beet soup known as borscht, and to top the late-night dinner off, she fed them hot pies made of cabbage and potatoes and mushrooms. The 3 kings were truly impressed with her generosity. In fact, they were so impressed that they asked her if she would like to accompany them to the town of Bethlehem, which was thousands of miles away from the Russian village. "I'm too old and wrinkled to leave my village," she replied. "My bent knees and crooked back can't handle walking too many steps. But may I ask, why are you following the brightest and largest star to a town I never heard of?" The shortest king, who chewed his food the loudest, replied, "We believe that a baby boy is going to be born in that town. He will grow up to be king. He will be so special that people in villages around the world, for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, will celebrate the night of his birth." The old woman was astounded, her mouth and eyes opened wide. The king with the longest black beard said, "We want to give him gifts, but all we have are pouches of gold and diamonds and rubies and emeralds. But what can a little boy do with jewels and money? Do you have any ideas of what a little boy would enjoy as a birthday gift?" The old woman smiled. She told the 3 kings to go to sleep in the warm beds. They were so tired from traveling from their own countries through Russia that they didn't protest, each opening their mouths and yawning wildly and widely. The 3 kings climbed into 3 beds and fell asleep immediately, and within 3 seconds each was snoring. Yes, even kings snore. But the old woman didn't rest her tired and wrinkled fingers. She bundled herself in winter clothes and pulled on her thickest boots. She stomped through the deep snow, went to her woodshed, and carried back to her kitchen stacks of wood a neighbor man had chopped for her that morning. She put the wood in her black iron stove, stuffed old newspapers into it, struck a match, and watched the orange, red, yellow, blue, green flames shoot up. She closed the stove's door so smoke didn't escape and fill the house. Then, with a smile never disappearing from her wrinkled face, she mixed wheat, fruit, water, butter together in a large bowl. And then she rolled the mixture into round dough balls and used a rolling pin to flatten them. Carefully using a small sharp knife, she turned the brown dough into shapes of sheep. Then, putting her creations on a tin pan, she put them into the oven. In the morning, she gave the wide-awake and very rested three kings the cookies. "We Russians call these cookies Pryanki. The children enjoy them. Please take this box of Pryanki to the baby boy in Bethlehem." The three kings were delighted. Mounting their camels, they waved goodbye to the nice, generous, wrinkled old lady. That night, she couldn't sleep. She felt an aching in her heart which made her mind ache. She tossed and turned all night, and in the morning her crooked back hurt so badly. But she knew she had to go find the boy in the town called Bethlehem. She didn't have a camel. She didn't have a donkey. She only had her bent legs. That morning, with a box filled with Pryanki, jars of borscht, places of pie made with cabbage, potatoes, mushrooms, sochivo, and jars of honey, poppy seeds, berries, chopped walnuts, and fruit jellies, she walked out of her house. She closed the door and began walking very slowly, thousands of miles, to a town she had never heard of. But, unlike the three kings, she didn't have a shining star to guide her. From that once-upon-a-time morning, nobody in the village had ever seen the old woman again. Well, that's not really totally true. There have been a few people who on Christmas Eve wake up in the middle of the night and look out at the snow-covered fields and look up to the twinkling star sky. And they see, well, they claim they see an old woman with a baby boy who is eating a Pryanki, but then she disappears. Alexandra inhaled and held her breath. The crowd of people held their breaths. The only sound was a loud banging. Everyone turned to look at the empty house. The wind was blowing against the front door. It was opening and shutting, opening and shutting, opening and shutting, slowly without anyone saying a word. The villagers carefully walked across the snow-covered fields towards their warm houses. Occasionally, each person tried to pretend they weren't sneaking a peek at the door that wouldn't stop banging. That Christmas Eve night, Alexandra went to sleep with a smile on her face. She taught herself that it's impossible for anyone to control everything that happens, but that using the heart, the brain, the body, the spirit, and the imagination, a person can control how they react to everything that happens. In the morning, there were no Christmas presents to open. But as Alexandra and her best friend Olga stomped through a new snowstorm on the way to school, they heard villagers talking to one another about Alexandra's version of the legendary Russian story of the old wrinkled woman named Babushka. Well, boys and girls, I hope wherever you are that you enjoyed listening to my Russian Christmas story. I wonder, are you Russian? Or do you know any Russians? There are many Russians where I sometimes live. Well, for instance, in the state of Nevada in the United States and Istanbul, Turkey, and Vancouver, Canada. I have friends in places like Gaza, Tokyo, London, New York, Mexico, and many other places. One thing I do know about you, even though we've never met, is that you are a storyteller. Oh yes, you are. So here's a challenge I'm giving you. Can you take the Christmas story of Babushka and use your imagination? Do what Alexandra did. Write your own version of the story. Oh, let me ask you another question. Do you think that maybe there really was a once-upon-a-time wrinkled old Russian lady named Babushka who once upon a time lived in that empty house? There are a few people in the village who continue to believe that on every Christmas Eve, they can see her walking through the snow-covered fields on her way to Bethlehem to give a little boy a box of Pryanki. I believe.